Howdy there, listener. Welcome to Reel, Audio Essays and Mysteries. You can call me Carter, and I'll be your host. Come with me as we wade through news stories, mysteries, declassified government files, true crimes, cults, and legends. Everyone and everything has a story, and there are so many out there. Some fact, some fiction, but all in need of being processed, analyzed, categorized, and above all, told. So, if you would, please pull up a chair, join me by the fire, and lend me your ear, because I have so much that I want to tell you. On May 11th, 1970, Lubbock, Texas thought it had dodged a bullet. Not long after sundown, a small tornado had formed in the new darkness and crept east of the city. Shortly thereafter, it dissipated off into the horizon, and the more than 150,000 residents thought the worst had passed them by, not knowing that a monster was still lurking in the darkness. They thought they had dodged a bullet, but they did so only to walk into a cannon. Now, Texas is no stranger to tornadoes. Texas is, after all, the tornado capital of the world, having the most out of any other state. And according to the Storm Prediction Center, Texas averaged 124 tornadoes a year from 2003 to 2022, with Kansas coming in second with 87 and Oklahoma at third with 66. Texas has also had its fair share of violent, record-breaking tornadoes, as you'll see later on in this series, as well as in this very episode. 17 years before this one in Lubbock, a major tornado hit Waco, Texas, killing 114 people. This is all to say that Texans are more or less used to tornadoes, or at least should be, especially those in northwestern Texas where Lubbock is located. However, the Lubbock, Texas tornado wasn't usual for many reasons. For one, there was and still is the belief that tornadoes don't hit big cities. This myth has evolved over the decades and has consistently been disproven. The modern version of this myth is that tornadoes don't or can't hit large cities with skyscrapers because the buildings block the wind. But this is not true in any way, shape, form, or fashion. New York City has had tornadoes, so has Chicago. St. Louis just had a tornado that the other day went straight through downtown. Speaking of St. Louis, there's also the Great St. Louis tornado, which is one of the deadliest on record. There's also the several that have hit Oklahoma City, and so on and so forth, like the ones in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin. They've all been hit by tornadoes. In fact, Houston gets hit by more tornadoes than any other city in the country, though it should be noted these are usually weaker tornadoes and or waterspouts caused by tropical storms and hurricanes. But we should also note that no building is tall and or wide enough or strong enough to stop a tornado from forming. Tornadoes start forming much, much higher than any building we can build. And in order to stop a tornado, you'd have to stop the storm. And in order to do that, you'd have to stop the wind. And if you stop the wind altogether, you're going to run into problems a lot bigger than a tornado. Now, secondly, while this tornado was unusual, is this tornado was much, much stronger than the region is used to, or at least stronger than tornadoes happen to be in the region that actually hit cities or towns. Now, Texas has seen incredibly violent tornadoes, like I mentioned earlier, but the farther west you get in the country, the less likely those types of tornadoes are, at least according to the statistics that we have. In fact, the Lubbock tornado is the westernmost F5 on record. It also broke a record for the largest tornado in Texas history and one of the largest in the United States. These types of strong, violent tornadoes tend not to form the farther west you get in the U.S., or at the very least do form but aren't really seen by anybody or hit anything of consequence. And like I said, this tornado was large. At its widest, it was around 1.5 miles wide and was one of the largest in U.S. history. Though it pales in comparison to some we've seen in recent memory, including one that just hit Lubbock the other day, or near Lubbock, and Morton, that they think, based on preliminary reports, was over 2 miles wide. Now, width doesn't necessarily equal strength, but the Lubbock tornado had both, and more than its fair share. The other oddity was the timing. It was at night. And people tend to not associate storms like this happening at night, at least not back then. Not only that, but the tornado was the second of the night, and had formed shortly after the all-clear had been given for the first tornado that had just passed by the town. People thought that the worst was over. Thought the storm was just going to pass on by. But by the time they realized what was going on, it was far too late. At 9:35 p.m. that night, the tornado touched down in the middle of the city near 19th Street and University Avenue. From there, it went northeast, tore an 8.5-mile-long path of destruction through the heart of the city, stopping just short of the Lubbock Municipal Airport, but not before taking nearly a quarter of the city with it. There were no sirens, and it was late at night. A worst-case scenario. You couldn't see it, and you didn't know it was coming. Only those who had the radio or TV on at the right time would have seen the warning, well, until the power was cut off by the storm. No one in the path knew where it was, or where it was going until it was already on top of them. By then it was too late to take shelter. It was too late to do anything but pray. Pray for 30 minutes. 30 minutes, the twister churned through the city, breaking brick, twisting metal. But at 10:05 p.m., it was gone. It was over. But the nightmares for Lubbock were just beginning, as the families and citizens wouldn't know the extent of the destruction until morning. And when dawn arrived, the sun's light revealed the gaping wound the funnel left in the heart of Lubbock, Texas. A wound that is still felt by many to this day. In some ways, though, this worst-case scenario might have actually been the best case, at least for how it hit. Now, it was a giant late-night tornado that started in the middle of the city. Already, not great. At its widest, the tornado was 1.5 miles wide. Though, unlike most tornadoes of this nature, it's said that it started out at its max width and was immediately strong. Tornadoes, these typically tend to start out smaller and then gain strength and then get bigger. If it was a multi-vortex tornado, there tends to be a breakdown that happens, where it goes from being small, breaking down, dissipating a bit, and then becoming much larger, much more violent. Though some start that way. The Lubbock tornado was one of the ones that started that way. Large and strong. A monster waiting in the dark. However, the city would get a blessing later. And it starting out this strong and this wide is part of it. And they would need every blessing they could get because it was also at night. You couldn't see it, and once it knocked out the power, you couldn't see anything. A true nightmare. But like I said, a blessing. Almost one in disguise. One of which was the timing of the tornado. Now, it was at night. It's the worst time for a tornado because you can't see it. They're terrifying. Night tornadoes are terrifying and extremely deadly due to their elusive nature, usually only being lit up by the lightning flashes behind them, or the power flashes when they knock down power lines, power stations, and cause other things to explode. The only light that lights up the funnel. Otherwise, it's just a black void. Not being able to see the monster hiding in the darkness or know where it's going makes it near impossible to avoid. You could run right into it without knowing. However, in this case, the tornado struck while everyone was already at home. The town was mostly closed for the night. People were already where they would have been anyway if they would have sought shelter. Not just because of how late it was, but because there was already a tornado warning before, though they did get the all clear and thought it was over. But many were still already prepared. They were already waiting for something to happen. They didn't really have to go that far to get back to where they already were, since after the first all clear was given, the second tornado had already formed and was destroying the city. Many may not even be able to get out of the shelter they had gotten into, and thank God for it. Because a night tornado really is that worst case scenario. But for Lubbock, a worst case scenario turned into a blessing. Take Waco earlier back in 1953. That large destructive tornado hit in the middle of the day, near the end of the workday. The streets were filled with people leaving jobs and school. A tornado descended upon the city in the middle of rush hour. Many didn't have time to seek shelter or even get inside, while the people of Lubbock were already inside their homes. They were already mostly safe. This is likely why the death toll of the Lubbock tornado was much lower than that of the Waco tornado, despite its extensive damage to the city and going right through the heart of it. Another blessing was the tornado's sudden change in size. At one point, the tornado hit Texas Tech University, but it did so in a weakened state, and this saved much of the college. But after hitting the university, it re-strengthened. However, when it re-strengthened, the tornado's funnel shrank. It went all the way from its 1.5 mile width down to a quarter of a mile wide, which is incredibly small in comparison. And this smaller size reduced the radius of the damage. However, while it shrank in size, it did not lose any of its intensity, and there's evidence that suggests that it only got stronger. While the path was narrower, whatever was in it was completely and utterly destroyed. 26 people would die that night, with over 1,500 injured. 8,800 homes were damaged, 460 of which were completely destroyed, along with 600 apartments, 250 businesses, and tens of thousands of cars. Cars which had their solid steel frames compacted down to a height of just 3 feet. And those were solid steel frames. This was the 70s. Not like today's with aluminum and such. No fiberglass in sight. Large trees were uprooted, and 25,000 telephone poles were knocked out of service. All in all, when the funnel finally dissipated outside of the Lubbock airport, it had caused $2 billion worth of damage, adjusted for inflation. Today, it stands as the 5th costliest tornado in U.S. history. Now, while developing the Fujita scale in the late 60s and early 70s, Ted Fujita came up with a scale of originally 12 ratings based on calculations and estimations of wind speed and damage. He had figured that only 0 through 5 would be used in practice for rating tornadoes, with anything above being considered inconceivable, or some even impossible on Earth, as F12 would be the speed of sound, or breaking the speed of sound. And that just isn't possible. He had studied tornadoes his whole life, some even up close, but had never really officially been able to get an in-depth analysis of a recent tornado. Not yet, let alone any violent one. He lacked the data to fully map out the scale the way he wanted, but this would all change with the Lubbock tornado. The extensive damage was unlike anything he had seen before, and would change many of his own theories, as well as bolster others. The Lubbock tornado gave Fujita even more proof of his theory of multi-vortex tornadoes, which are tornadoes that have 2 or more suction vortices that either make up or rotate around a singular funnel. And while surveying the damage, he made an incredibly detailed hand-drawn map that he would use for his analysis, and from that, he developed his 5 tiers of his new tornado rating scale, one that would become the official standard a year later in 1971. So the Lubbock tornado is directly responsible for the creation of the Fujita scale, and later the enhanced Fujita scale that we use today. It's also responsible for the creation of what is known as the National Wind Institute at Texas Tech, which is located in Lubbock. They also have there a tornado simulator, which is a giant wind machine that creates the suction and spinning winds of a tornado, so they can test the damage, see what it's capable of. But despite this tornado being what shaped the scale, and believed to have always been just a high-end F5, it was later revealed by the National Weather Service in 2023 that the Lubbock tornado was originally rated an F6 by Mr. Fujita himself, before officially being downgraded later by the National Weather Service. The Lubbock tornado is one of only 2 tornadoes that got a preliminary rating of F6 by Mr. Fujita, before then being retooled and labeled as an F5. You know, it's funny. Despite initially believing that something beyond an F5 was inconceivable, and that even if one were to happen it would be impossible to tell from F5 damage, the very tornado that shaped the F scale got the F6 rating. The damage he saw that day changed his mind. And it wasn't like he hadn't seen damage before. He had been fascinated with tornadoes his whole life and was dedicated to studying them. He'd seen pictures, drawings, seen damage in person. He saw every single data point there was on tornadoes, but this one, this monster, this was something else. It was something that every other tornado from now on would be compared to. One that only one would match. And that one will come next in part 3, the Ohio Super Tornado. But until then, stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you back here on Reel to Reel.